you said that the problem with regard to AI might be the problem that human beings have, is that we're not aligned, so to speak. And so why would we expect the AIs to be? And I think that's a perfectly reasonable criticism. I mean, part of the reason that we educate young people so intensely, especially those who'll be in leadership positions, is because we want to solve the alignment problem. That's part of what you do when you socialize young people. Now, the way we've done that for the entire history of the productive West, let's say, is to ground young people who are smart and who are likely to be leaders in something approximating the religious and humanist, religious/humanist/enlightenment tradition. It's part of that golden thread. Now, part of the problem, I would say, with the large language model systems is that they're hyper-trained on, they're like populists in a sense. They're hyper-trained on the over-proliferation of nonsense that characterizes the present. And the problem with the present is that time hasn't had a chance to winnow out the wheat from the chaff. Now, what we did with young people is we referred them to the classic works of the past, right? That would be the Western canon, whose supremacy has been challenged so successfully by the postmodern nihilists. We said, well, you have to read these great books from the past. And the core of that would be the Bible. And then you'd have all the poets and dramatists whose works are grounded in the biblical tradition that are like secondary offshoots of that fundamental narrative. That'd be people like Dante and Shakespeare and Goethe and Dostoevsky. And we can imagine that those more core ideas constitute a web of associated ideas that all other ideas would then slot into. You could make the case technically, I think, that these great works in the past are mapping the most fundamental relationships between ideas that can possibly be mapped in a manner that is sustainable and productive across the longest possible imaginable span of time. And that's different than the proliferation of a multiplicity of ideas that characterize the present. Now, that doesn't mean we know how to weight. So if you're going to design a large language model, you might want to weight the works of Shakespeare 10,000 times per word as crucial as, what would you say, the archives of the New York Times for the last 5 years. It's something like that. Like, there's an insistence in the mythological tradition that people have two fundamental poles of orientation. One is heavenward, or towards the depths. You can use either analogy, and that's the orientation towards the divine or the transcendent or the most foundational. And then the other avenue of orientation is social. That'd be, the reciprocal relationship that exists between you and I and all the other people that we know. And if you're only weighted by the personal and the social, then you tilt towards the mad mob populism that can characterize societies when they go off kilter. You need another axis of orientation to make things fundamental. Now, I just want to add one more thing to this that's very much worth thinking about. So the postmodernists discovered, this is partly why we have this culture war, the postmodernists discovered that we see the world through a story. And they're right about that, because what they figured out, and they weren't the only ones, but they did figure it out, was that we don't just see facts, we see weighted facts. And the weighting system, a description of someone's weighting system for facts is a story. That's what a story is, technically. It's the prioritization of facts that direct your attention. That's what you see portrayed in a characterization on screen. Okay, now, the postmodernists figured out that we see the world through a story, but then they made a dreadful mistake, which was a consequence of their Marxism. They said that the story that we see the world through is one of power, and that there is no other story than power, and that the dynamic in society is nothing but the competition between different groups or individuals striving for power. And I don't mean competence, I mean the ability to use compulsion and force, right? It's like involuntary submission. I'm more powerful than you if I can make you submit involuntarily. Now, the biblical canon has an alternative proposition that's nested inside of it, which is that the basis of individual stability and societal stability and productivity is voluntary self-sacrifice, not power. And that is, those two ethos, they are 100% opposed, right? You couldn't get to visions that are more disparate than those two. Now, the power narrative dominates the university, and it's driving the sorts of pathologies that you described as having flowed out, let's say, into the tech world and then into the corporate and the media world and into the corporate world beyond that. One of the things we're doing at ARC is trying to establish the structure of the underlying narrative, which is a sacrificial narrative, that would properly ground, for example, the technological enterprise so that it wouldn't become dystopian. And, you alluded to that when you pointed to the fact that there has to be something outside the technological enterprise to stabilize it. You alluded to, for example, a more fundamental ethos of reciprocity when you said that one form of combating the proclivity for top-down force, for example, in this one-way information pipeline, is to make it two-way. Right, well, you're pointing there to something like, see, reciprocity is a form of repetitive self-sacrifice. Like if we're taking turns in a conversation, I have to sacrifice my turn to you and vice versa, right? And that makes for a balanced dynamic. And so, anyways, one of the problems we're trying to solve with this ARC enterprise is to thoroughly evaluate the structure of that underlying narrative. And we could really use some engineers to help, because the large language models are going to be able to flesh out this domain property, because they do map meaning in a way that we haven't been able to manage technically before.
So I think the single biggest fight that has ever happened over technology, and there have been many of those fights over the course of the last, especially 500 years, the single biggest fight is going to be over what are the values of the AIs. To your points, like what will the AIs tell you when you ask them anything that involves values, social organization, politics, philosophy, religion? That fight, I think, is going to be a million times bigger and more intense and more important than the social media censorship fight. And I don't say that because the social media censorship fight has been extremely important, but AI is going to be much more important because AI is such a powerful technology that I think it's going to be the control layer for everything else. And so I think the way that you talk to your car and your house, and the way that you organize your ideas, the way you learn, the way your kids learn, the way the healthcare system works, the way the government works, how government policies are implemented, like AI will end up being the front end on all those things. And so the value system in the AIs is going to be, maybe the most important set of technological questions we've ever faced. As you know, out of the gate, this is going very poorly.
Yes.
So, right. And there's this question hanging over the field right now, which you could sort of summarize as why are the AIs woke? Why do the big lab AIs coming out of the major AI companies, why did they come out with the philosophy of a 21-year-old sociology undergrad at Oberlin College, with blue hair, who's like completely emotionally activated? Right, and you can see many examples of people have posted queries online that show that, or you can run your own experiments. And they basically have the fullest sort of version of this kind of fundamentalist, emotional, far progressive, absolutist wokeness coded into them. You said up front that the presumption, must be that they're just getting trained on, more recent bad data versus older, good data. There is some of that, but I will tell you that there is a bigger issue than that, which is these things are being specifically trained by their owners to be this way.